Return of the Obra Dinn is the kind of indie game that I love playing. It's not just some retread of AAA gameplay scaled down with inferior graphics, no. This game is one of those experiences that you simply can't find anywhere else because no AAA studio would ever come up with something like this. And even if they would, I doubt the robots in charge of AAA studios and their investors would greenlight a project like this one in the first place. It's also not gameplay from 30 years ago reinterpreted by nostalgia like many other retro-inspired games, so don't let the monochromatic look fool you. And the game manages to present said experience beautifully with very few and extremely simple gameplay mechanics that still give you puzzles that are at times fairly difficult, but they also make you feel smart for figuring them out. You play an insurance investigator sent on board of the good ship Obra Dinn. Figures that after Papers, Please showed that a bureaucracy game can be fun and engaging, its designer Lucas Pope chose insurance investigator as his next profession to make interesting. The Obra Dinn, after being considered lost at sea, has mysteriously reappeared at port after 5 years, only that there's nobody left alive on the ship. You're outfitted with a journal that gives you a list of crew and passenger names and some drawings of how they look, and your task is to identify all 60 people on board and determine their cause of death. To wit, you're given a magic pocket watch called Memento Mortem, or Remember Death. Whenever you find a corpse on the ship, it allows you to hear the final moments of the person dying, and then it shows you an interactive freeze frame of the moment of their death, where you can walk around and see who or what else might be present and if they had something to do with the current victim's demise, which frequently is the case. You have various ways of identifying people on board of the Obra Dinn at your disposal. Obviously, most of the time you're not conveniently given the names of the people who are present through the radio plays. I think overall there are maybe half a dozen names mentioned out loud during dialogue, so you'll have to really take in the environments and situations in order to deduce everybody's identity. Their nationality, and tied to that the accent they speak in, can be a clue, or something they're wearing or carrying, or even who they were talking to and who they're with in the scene can give you hints. The captain of the ship obviously isn't going to be climbing all over the rigging after all. The aforementioned drawings also depict scenes on the ship, and even the proximity of certain characters on those drawings can give you hints as to who is who. All those deaths aren't just random events though. The game overall attempts to tell the tale of how the ship set sail and what transpired on the journey that ended up costing the lives of the crew and passengers. The narrative is divided into multiple chapters, each of which is again subdivided into multiple scenes. Typically, each chapter you can find is told backwards, so you'll start out with zero context and many characters either dead or missing. Most scenes both show you how the current subject is in the process of dying, and it also has a corpse somewhere else that has died before somewhere in the scene, which ends up being the link that drags you backwards through each chapter's story. I think that this idea of tracing all the steps backwards is neat in theory, however in practice it just means that after you've seen all the scenes in any given chapter, you'll just have to go through all of them again in chronological order to actually piece together the context of the chapter. Once you've figured that out, it's largely pointless to explore all those scenes the first time around until you've uncovered the entire chapter. Another annoyance of those scenes is that each time you experience it for the first time, it gives you about a minute or so of music until it fades to black, where it then shows you the journal entry for that scene and then plonks you back into the scene. You can explore that scene during the introduction in the exact same way as after the journal is written, it just won't let you either move on to the next scene or exit the chapter altogether until that bit is done. I'm not sure why it was designed this way because I can't think of a reason for it to be like this. I mean, I wouldn't complain as much if the music you get to hear was good, but in stark contrast to the excellent voice acting and sound effects, the music is really not all that good here. For one, the compositions are fairly simplistic and show methods of composing that reek of amateur because some of the rhythms and melodies are simply not written like they usually are for the instruments that play them. And unfortunately, the music is rendered through a low-quality digital orchestra. It's either that, or Lucas Pope has little experience dialing in orchestral sounds in his digital audio workstation. You can clearly hear it by how the horn instruments obviously intend to start playing on the beat, but take a few milliseconds to swell up to full volume. As both a trombone player and someone who has dabbled with digital orchestras, I know this effect all too well, especially from free or very cheap digital orchestra plugins. It makes the music sound stilted and not well conducted, because if not all the instruments play their notes at the exact intended time, the piece just feels off. Now make no mistake, I may have just dealt out a few criticisms here against Return of the Obra Dinn, but don't let any of that take away from what an excellent deductive puzzle game this is. It's just that I didn't want to discuss too much of the content of the game in this review in order to avoid spoilers or showing solutions to the puzzles. Because there's absolutely no hand-holding here, you're really on your own in order to figure out the identity and fate of every person on the ship. Sometimes that means following easy-to-miss clues, but other times you can even rely on a simple process of elimination. You can't quite brute force yourself through everything here, but for some characters it's certainly doable, which can lend struggling players a helping hand. The game saves progress in increments of 3 identities, so at any given point if you think you've figured out 2 identities and their fates, you can just try to guess a third one, and once you get lucky, the game confirms it. I had to do it myself a few times like this. I'm sure I must have missed certain clues in there for these instances, but I really like the balance the game strikes between asking you to use logic to solve something while still being lenient enough to reward brute force in certain circumstances. So yeah, Return of the Obra Dinn might not be perfect, but it's still an excellent puzzle game that offers an experience wholly unique to itself, and you should absolutely check it out.